In 1986, I sold my studio in West Texas and moved to San Diego to go to work with Dean Collins. And Dean and I had become good friends, and I was overwhelmed with the quality of work that he was producing. And he had become quite well known as a lecturer and seminar instructor on theories of light and all about photographic lighting, studio, location, outdoor light, light of all kinds. Dean had some very unique theories that he'd come up with that were revolutionary at the time. And it was time to begin a production of videotape. So I was brought in to the company along with Dean's partner Gary Burns and the Adventure Communications team of Bill Holshevnikoff, Lee Bonelli, and Spencer Nielsen. And we started working on what became this Fine Light video series. The interesting thing about the series was that it became popular right off. Now, it's 20 years ago that we first went into production. In fact, I'll never forget the first day of production. It was the day of the shuttle disaster in '86 in January. That was our first day on production, and we got nothing done, and we ended up scrapping the day and starting over. But we have a lot of fond memories of the production itself and all the things that went on. During this series, you're going to see some things that might not apply in terms of equipment and photographic equipment for today. However, look at the detail and look at the theories of light that Dean will explain and showcase. And what you'll find is that the information is still there, and the information is solid. And these tapes are still being used today in colleges and universities all over the country, as well as high schools, and a lot of people still use these for reference. You'll find out about one of the shoots that we did, which was a motion shot of a motorcycle, where we shot this picture with hot lights, studio lights, and at a very, very slow shutter speed, and the bike was absolutely still. And we moved the background, we turned the wheels, and it looked like the driver was going 100 miles an hour. And it's the funniest thing to watch because nothing was moving except the background rolled about 6 inches during the exposure. And you'll think the guy's driving down a sunlight street at 80 miles an hour. So those are very, very fun, interesting shoots that have so much information behind them. You can't help but learn something from some of this information. So I really enjoyed working on this series with Dean for several years. And I hope that you enjoy this series. I think you're going to learn a lot.
As you watch this program, think about the concepts that Dean is talking about. The concepts are universal, and it doesn't matter whether you're photographing with film or you're shooting digitally. It makes no difference. You've got to learn how to control the situation, how to control the light, and how to create the right kind of image. And the principles are universal over and over and over again. One of the challenges we've got in this digital revolution that we're in right now is that you've got too many photographers out there that are forgetting about the basics of photography. The basics are still the same, and you've got to understand the principles of photography and the principles of controlling light in order to create the most pleasing images for your clients and the most pleasing images of your clients. And it doesn't matter whether you're photographing a motorcycle or you're photographing a mom, a family, whatever your specialty in photography is, the principles that Dean is going to talk about are universal. And that's what made every one of his programs so exciting to people, because he changed the way they looked at their business. You can find photographer after photographer today who attended just one Dean Collins program who will talk about how much he changed the way they looked at the business, the way they photographed, the way they looked at each challenge, the way they moved into on-location photography instead of staying inside thinking they could only control the situation from within their studio.
Public image is a very big part of this attractive woman's career. An anchor woman for a San Diego TV station, Bree Walker possesses the look of a glamorous personality in the studio and is equally comfortable on a leisurely horseback ride.
The objective in this situation, they wanted to cover for Choice Magazine, and it is of a local newscaster. She's a country kind of gal. Their hobby is they wanted to capture her hobby for possibly an inside shot on the story, but they might have wanted it for the cover, so we had to cover that pretty heavily. Multiple lighting setups with her and her horse on location to give that backlit kind of free feeling. But she is a talented woman as a newscaster, but she's also known as a very attractive woman. She's kind of a high glamour look in town. So they wanted to also capture that. So not only did we have to do the outdoor shot, but we had to bring her in the studio and do this cover look, very glamour, very powerful, good-looking woman shot. So That was bringing in the right makeup people, bringing in her hair stylist that she relies on and she knows real well, choreographing the whole situation of being on location, getting in the studio and getting the shot off, because she only gave us about 4 hours because of her time schedule so tight.
It is early morning, and the crew unloads the necessary gear for the first of 2 setups at the Equestrian Center. Dean Collins will use medium format cameras for this portrait series of Bree Walker, designed for the cover story of a local magazine. Collins checks the quality of the morning light as the crew begins loading the 120 backs for the shoot. A Lightform P42 panel will be used as a dual-purpose reflector and diffusion source for the setup. 4 EC1 clamps attached to light stands will hold the panel during the shooting. Collins and Tony Corbell add the reflective fabric as assistant Kevin Scott Schumacher assembles a Hasselblad 2000F with a 250mm f4 lens. Dean Collins talks about lens selection for outdoor portraiture.
A 250mm lens f4 was used on the 2000 body. 2000 body was used because that particular body doesn't vignette the longer lenses during viewing it, as the old bodies did. So, and the f4 lens was excellent for breaking up background definition. F4, when you shoot at f4 wide open, the backgrounds become out of focus very, very quick, and those large circles of confusion throws everything into soft pastels. During reflective lighting, when we reflected light back into her, we knew we'd have a darker background, so we chose more of just trees and textures and a little bit of grass back there and to create a non-distracting background to drop the copy in. When we dropped the translucent in and raised the background brightness, we knew we could get away with a little bit of the stables and fences and more of the theme of being around horses. When it was raised in that key, then it became kind of comfortable and it didn't compete with the copy.
The P42 panel with both reflective and translucent fabrics is clipped to the stands. With both fabrics on before Collins begins shooting, valuable time will be saved during the shoot by removing the reflective fabric to instantly create a large diffusion panel. Shot bag weights are added to each stand to secure the panel.
Kevin, move this way. Okay, stop right there. Okay, yeah, we'll bring that pup in just about right there to kick that light back in.
Collins then begins setting up for the first shot, which will utilize the reflective side of the large P42 panel.
Walk yourself just a little bit more that way. Stop right there. Okay, that'll be your, you're going to have to mark that spot, get the reflector in position, and then same thing we'll use as a translucent shooting that way. Sun's coming through, we'll bring up the entire background by dropping her area, just a translucent layer there. So we'll shoot this way for reflective, drop the camera over there, fire that way for translucent. We can pick up 2 keys real quick and get her out of here.
By correctly positioning the panel, Collins can create 2 lighting setups, one reflective and the other translucent, in which only the camera angle must change. Working with the busy schedule of Bree Walker, Collins will be able to achieve 2 distinctly different looks with a minimum of setup time. Working with a strong backlight on the subject for the reflective setup, Collins adds a pro lens shade to protect the lens from the harsh sunlight. A Polaroid back is attached for the first check print, and Collins directs the placement of the reflective panel for the proper angle of incidence.
Go. Stop. The question I have is that too much? Do you want a 3/4 one?
With the first test print complete, Collins and Choice Magazine art director Vince Torano discuss the background density of the shot for copy.
Yeah, I'll drop it down so I'll
If a darker background is desired, Collins can simply move the reflector panel closer to the subject to raise the value of the subject area.
Dark horse in there. Right, if you need to bump into it. I don't know how she can like her. Oh well. Yeah, some good news across
Dean Collins explains.
Not only did we work with translucent to raise the background brightness, but we also chose to work with a lower key background. That's done by taking a reflector, same frame as before, but throwing white fabric on, and then kicking the light back into the face from that low profile sun skimming. So we got backlighting, kicking light back in, large panel, not a silver one, but a large wide one, given soft edge quality, low specularity, taking an instant reading, and then setting the value. By reflecting the light back in, you raised her value brightness, shut down the aperture for, increase the shutter speed to lower the subject back at the proper place, which then lowers the background to a darker key. And which is very attractive because with that nice backlight rimming situation, you have a very stark separation off that dark background. So with translucent lighting, we've given the art director a high key. Reflective lighting, we've given the art director a low key. So we've actually changed our keys with the way we've lit the subject. And that gives them multiple choices for the cover of high key and low key, and they're just happy as clams about that. You right here. This time we want you about right here, and we want him.
Collins brings Bree and her horse into position for the first part of the outdoor shooting.
There you go, bring him in. Yeah, just. Yeah, what kind of light do I got?
Note the shadows on the ground caused by the strong backlight on Bree. Kevin rechecks the incident meter reading with the dome of the meter facing the reflective light source. This reading will establish a hypothetical 18% value within the plane of the subject. With Bree and the horse correctly positioned in front of the panel, Collins begins working quickly to capture a series of attractive portraits using the reflective light. Exposure is at a 500 at f4.
Don't smile so much, softer smile, Bree. Excellent, excellent, very good. Okay. Super, 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 just like that. Nobody move. Okay, a little bit closer into him. Yeah, there, excellent, excellent. Great, 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 great. Excellent right there. Okay, Moose is looking fabulous. Good job, Moose. Okay, here we go, Moosey. You're doing great, you're doing great. Excellent, excellent. Okay, Bree, turn your face a little bit out that way, just right there. Excellent, great, great. Okay, this is a big one. This is good. Enough of the publications right here. Soft, Bree. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, oh, excellent. Very good, very good. Okay, good. Okay, Moose, right here. Moose, right there. Okay, good, good. Just turn your face out just a little bit, Bree. Okay, excellent. Very good, very good. Bree, turn your face just a little bit that way. Excellent, right? Excellent, excellent. Oh, yeah, all right. Okay, we got it, we got it. That's good. Okay, Moosey, you're looking great.
As Collins wraps up the shooting on the first setup, the crew will begin preparing for the second series of portraits. Dean Collins talks about a high-key look with diffused light.
Excellent, like that big smile. We had the ability to reflect light because of the time of day she gave us early morning. Sun was low skimming across, so we could both reflect light back into the face and translucent light because we have side lighting situation to get some good pattern on our face. We tried both. First one was translucent, which simply means that you get a good angle of sun crossing her, 45-degree light. It's kind of hard light quality because it is, the sun. And then you drop the scrim in there, which softens the light quality up on her and the horse, gives a good form on both of them, lowers their value and brightness. You open up your camera for the loss and makes the background go very light, kind of a high-key, soft pastel feeling. And for her tone, being the blonde hair and the very light skin, it was a good key for her. She fits very well in a very light key.
The reflective fabric is quickly peeled off to reveal the large diffusion source, and Bree is now moved to the opposite side of the panel.
We're trying to get him
Notice the shadow on the ground caused by the large scrim.
This way, facing this way.
Head this way. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And back him up just a little bit. Okay, how's that sun doing?
It's gonna stay out.
Pardon? It's gonna, okay. Okay, well, we probably want to... Kevin, the moment you get it up there, I want you to go step in and get another reading. Tony, both of you guys move that in just a little closer, I don't mind the 3-car. Fine, right there. That horse is doing really well with that. Okay, just like that, just like that. Good, okay, right here, okay. Excellent, staying just like that. Excellent, excellent.
After
okay.
An incident meter reading is taken with the dome of the meter facing the light source, Collins shoots a check print and then moves on to make 3 exposures on his development test roll.
Okay, tell you what, we're doing 2 exposures here. We're doing, okay, 750. Lock it down. Okay, Bree. Yeah, Bree, right here, mate. Excellent. Okay, just like that. A little smile right there. A little bit of smile. Yeah, yeah. Sneaking a little bit closer to him. Just a little bit closer to him. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Excellent, 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 excellent. Oh, my God. Okay, hold it right there. You guys are doing great, doing great, doing great.
Rated at ISO 150 for a 1/2 stop under exposure. Ektachrome 100 is then used for the remainder of the outdoor shooting. Collins uses transparency film for the separations that will be made for the magazine printing. Exposure is at a 2/50th at f4.
Yeah, Moosey. Moosey. Okay, yeah. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Moosey's great. All right. This is great. Here we go. Right there. Excellent, 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 excellent. Moose. Oh, Moose, wake up, will you? Come on. This is your debut. Okay, yeah, like that. Good. Moosey. Oh, look, our girl. Okay, right there. Okay, could you bring in the girl horses? Okay, here we go, Moose, right there. Excellent, excellent, excellent. One more time. Here we go, here we go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's looking good. Good, okay, yeah. Woman being strained by horse. That's good. I like that one. Good. Woman happy with horse. Okay, fine, great. That's great. Good, 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 good. Okay, right there. A little bit of a smile. Breathe in, dude. A little closer. Right there. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, right there. Okay.
Using a
That's
relatively
good.
fast shutter speed
Okay, bring him
enables
down just a little
Collins
bit
to
closer.
work
Breathe.
with the bright background that he has chosen, and also freeze the movement of the horse during the shooting. A few final exposures completes the outdoor shoot, leaving the art director with two distinctly different looks to choose from, while also keeping Bree Walker on schedule.
Right there. Excellent. Super, super, Bree. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Oh, God.
A look at the light qualities from the first setup reveals a strong backlight from the early morning sun, with the white reflector providing a slightly directional source of main light. By using the reflector to increase the value of the subject area, the background is then darkened when the shutter speed is adjusted for the additional light. The translucent panel provides an opposite effect. By placing the panel between the sun and the subject value decreases, and when the shutter speed is adjusted for the loss of light, the background density increases to create the high-key portrait. By utilizing the proper lenses and apertures, these methods of controlling the density of the background through subject brightness will provide predictable results for a variety of portrait settings. Back in the studio, Collins begins setting up for the second part of the Bree Walker shoot. A Hasselblad 500 ELX with a 150mm f4 lens will provide Collins with the ability to shoot a rapid succession of images in a minimum of time. To achieve a high glamour look with the least amount of setup time, Collins has designed a single light source system for the indoor portraits. A Lightform P22 panel with a single layer of diffusion material will be used as the main separation panel. EC1 clamps are used to attach the panel to two light stands. A Broncolor strobe head is raised on a boom stand and placed directly above the separation panel. Dean Collins explains the single light system.
If you can get one light to do the job of all your lights, both hair lights, main light, fill light, you're a lot better off because what you see is exactly what you're going to get. Letting that light go past, going through a scrim to create a very high quality to the hair, then it goes past, on past the head, hits the reflector, kicks back in as a main, and then goes below and kicks back in as a fill. What you see is what you're going to get. The main light, the actual reflector straight in the face, has got a very soft quality to the face. Doesn't create much definition in the way of specularity or hard shadow edges, but then the bottom light from below, from that strong silver material, kicks light back up and gives a very strong catch light to the eye, which gives a real clean, bright, crisp look to the face. Specularity on the skin I'm not concerned with because a lot of makeup was put on her face, a lot of pancake makeup, plus she has very, very light skin, and specularity doesn't show up very much on light skin because there's no contrast there. So if you can get away with one light and do all the jobs, what you see is what you get, and you have a lot of confidence and you can really, really get into it because you totally know what you see in the camera is exactly what you're going to get on film.
A small strip of Roscoe Lux amber gel is placed at the edge of the separation flat to add warmth to Bree's hair, while raw, unaffected light is allowed to spill over the panel. Lightform double clips, which are primarily used to connect panels together, are used to hold the gel in place. Next, a P15 panel with white reflective material is set up to act as the main light source. An EC1 clamp will hold the panel securely to a light stand, while a second EC1 is added for stability and to ensure the angle of light reflectance will not vary. A second P15 panel with a silver reflective fabric will provide a base fill for the subject.
A lot of people will even dispute the fact you can do this with one light, because they're going to say that with that light coming from behind and doing the job for you, you're going to have loss in the hair, you're going to blow it out. This girl had light hair, very pastelish hair, and if anybody's going to get blown out, she is. So you just realize that if it's too bright in the hair, since raw light is hitting the panels and kicking back in, and you got translucent layer lighting the hair, if it's too bright, then put more layers of translucent material on it. That's all. I mean, you can totally lower the hair light by how many layers you put on it. It doesn't affect the brightness on the main light because it's raw light hitting those panels. So it's really just using common sense and realizing that you can control the hair brightness by multiple layers of diffusion material. Light pass, bouncing, kicking in, and it's just a ricochet routine. It's just a real nice, but it really does your hair.
With Bree now prepared for a more glamorous
just
portrait,
get yourself nice and
Collins
comfortable.
sets her
Just
into
almost
position and
just like
begins
so.
the
I'm very
session.
because what we're going to do is work back and forth at you and just work within there, and I'll just talk to you.
right.
Okay, you got it? If you don't make it, we're out of here.
By taking a close look at the lighting setup, we can see the effects of each element and how they add to the look of the photograph. With the separation panel in place, only a silhouette of Bree is produced. The addition of the white reflective panel provides a main light source from the raw light spilling over the top of the separation panel. Utilizing white reflective material creates a soft edge transfer and a low specular quality, similar to the qualities that a large softbox or umbrella would provide. Finally, the silver base reflector provides bright, crisp fill light with more pronounced specular qualities, again from the spill of the separation strobe. Power cables are attached to a second Pulso power pack as Kevin begins to set up the background strobe. A bare bulb Broncolor strobe is placed on a light stand and aimed at the black background wall. An amber gel cone is placed directly over the bare bulb to create a warm, even burst effect. These background gels can be easily constructed with Roscoe Lux gels and Scotch tape. Bree's makeup artist makes a final check before Collins begins shooting the series of portraits for Choice magazine. Kevin takes a reflective meter reading with a 5-degree spot attachment on a Minolta 4 meter. Collins compares this reading to the initial incident reading in the subject area to determine the relative brightness of the background burst. An overall view of the setup reveals the relationship of each element as Dean Collins works with Bree for a cover shot. Gutter space is provided on the left of the photographs for copy.
Drop the shoulder even a little bit harder, just kind of like, and big smile, big smile. Yeah. You turn the face into me. Turn your body hard that way, hard that way, hard that. Yeah, that's it. Now turn the face into me. Watch this now. Roll the head just a little bit. Yeah, that's fine. That looks good. Excellent effect. Looks excellent. Okay.
Dean Collins explains the control of colors on a black background.
Yeah. Something that's always surprised people a little bit is that I've always worked with color off of black backgrounds. It's pretty easy if you realize it. If you bring a strobe in close enough to black, you're going to be able to make it any density you want. I mean, it overexposes it. And the amount of power in the background relative to the power on my main light. If I don't have enough power in the background, I can either increase the power on my background or decrease the power on my main light and open up my aperture, which will control the background brightness. By changing the color, we wish to have by changing the color, you just put on different gels made by Roscoe, and to create kind of a round gradation burst, all you do is you just take these Roscoe gels and make them into small little cones like this and drop them over bare bulb strobe tubes. If you put them on strobes with reflectors, you get a very round, concise, form of it's kind of like a circle. But if you go on this bare bulb, drop it on there, then you get this bursting soft gradation, very soft and nice edge transfer, which is very, very natural. People like it a lot. We're working on a flat black wall and creates that soft gradation very even. If you work on background paper, it gives that rippling effect, and that can be nice, but if you don't want any kind of texture at all, you have to actually sand out and paint a wall flat black. So these are Roscoe gels. They handle heat very, very well. But around 1200 watt seconds, you'll have a permanently blue strobe wherever, which is cool. I mean, that's cool. And if you do have to use a lot of power, I'd suggest you borrow the strobe from somebody, do the shot, and then return it late at night and let them know that it's a little off color.
Controlling the background strobe on a black surface can produce a variety of different moods in a portrait, while also providing additional separation for the subject. The effect of adding an amber gel to the bare strobe produces a warm burst effect behind Bree. And by changing the background gel to a medium blue, the burst changes to a cool, subtle separation. In this way, Collins can match his background to any color of copy that the art director may choose.
Right there, right there, right there. Great, 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 great. Drop the head a little bit down, just a touch. Right there, okay. Sensational. Okay, turn your face just a little bit that way there. Just right there. Drop it down, 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 down. Okay.
As Dean Collins continues shooting, he produces three-quarter length and close-up portraits of Bree with the same lighting setup and the 150mm lens. Collins talks about his lens selection for the studio portrait.
The only problem with working with the lighting situation as we have it is that you're kind of hidden from the subject with these panels. So using a 150mm lens kept us in close. You don't want to throw in a long lens and back way up because you'll lose total contact with the subject. The lens was put on a ELX body motor drive, which gave us the ability to, with response with the person, you're getting them up, you're firing those frames off, because at that time you don't want to be whining at a camera as the subject's giving you a great look. Keeping your strobes on low power too, as low as you can possibly get it to get the depth of field you need, is important to give you that recycle time. That motor on that ELX body they can wind that film through quick, so you don't want your strobes slowly recycling up and you're waiting for it. So quick recycle times, that motor gives you a lot of expression, and that's what you're going for. Excellent, excellent. Okay, right there.
As the day's shooting comes to a close, we can see the point of view of Bree Walker as Dean Collins works with her for a variety of expressions and poses.
Yeah, good, 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 good. A little happier. Bree Walker is an absolute pumpkin to work with. She's just super, and she's very easygoing, especially with as much press as she gets and as well known as she is. She's got a very, very minor ego to it all, and if she does, we don't know, at least not on the set. She's very easy to work with, but in this situation, photographing personalities, you have to contend with egos at all times. So getting them up, getting them into it, letting them know they're doing everything right, even sometimes when they're doing a little bit wrong, somehow saying it without letting them know they're doing it wrong is very, very important. So the ease of the lighting situation, you don't want a lot of equipment all over the place, you don't want to have any technical failures because they'll fly right off the handle. And you also have a makeup artist on the set too, making sure that they're going to want to get in there, detail it, and get everybody excited, because when it really starts happening, I mean, it's only a matter of about 2 minutes that you have, and you really start cranking, you really get into it, and when you break, cut it, they're feeling good, you're feeling good, you got great stuff, I mean, you got a client forever.
In this classic high-key portrait, entitled Claire, Collins controlled each element of the photograph to create the illusion of day for night. A thorough understanding of natural daylight qualities and the busy schedule of a young businesswoman permitted this portrait to be taken just prior to 10 p.m.
In photographing this young lady in her home, if you notice, the home is very light pastel, airy, a lot of windows. Obviously, they like that house full of lights. A lot of light during the daytime. So with the blonde, light furniture, light clothes, to have windows being very, very dark back there it just wouldn't fit the personality or even the home. So by manipulating with a strobe outside to create a natural look in this case, realizing that when you're inside of a home, your eye exposes for the tonalities and the brightness within that home, and the outside is much, much brighter, so that's why it normally washes out. If you ever look at anybody in a home, usually the outside is much brighter than, and naturally is when you're outside there and your eyes exposing for that. So it create a natural feeling of that girl's skin tone, hair, clothes, within her home, her key, and that was the whole plan here, is to create a very natural situation for her. Where the camera is going to be. You're going to run.
After arriving at the client's home, Collins and his assistant, Mark Shapiro, planned the lighting setup with the help of Tony Corbell, acting as stand-in.
Outside to give them the silhouettes, to give the texture of the daytime, so it doesn't look like so dark back there with all those whites and high key. Plus, she's got blonde hair, so.
The outdoor setup begins with a series of light-form P22 panels with white reflective fabrics. The panels are connected to each other with double clips, eventually creating a solid white cyclorama for the background of the photograph. Mark sets a bare bulb Broncolor strobe head on a mini stand and aims the light source directly at the reflective panels. Power is drawn from a Pulso 4 power pack. Inside the home, Dean Collins sets up the Cinar P2 4x5 camera. A 210mm f5.6 Schneider DB lens is Collins' choice for the portrait. Assistant Kevin Scott Schumacher begins the indoor lighting setup with a Lightform P42 panel. 2 layers of ripstop nylon diffusion fabric are added to create the main light source. A P15 with opaque fabric is added to the front of the main panel to act as a gobo for the lens. Set behind the P42 panel, a Broncolor strobe with reflector will create the main light. The strobe is hooked up to a Pulso 4 power pack. To complete the setup, a bare bulb strobe is aimed at the ceiling in the corner to create soft, even illumination for the background, while also providing separation for the subject.
When you walk into somebody's home, you don't really want to tear it apart. You have to move a few things, maybe a coffee table, things that are easily put in. Sofas, things like that are kind of off limits because you don't know what's under the sofa. And they usually don't want you to find out. So you try to keep it intact as well as you can. That's why the lighting system has to be as simple as possible. This particular shot in high key, if you ever note, subtle shadow forms are what's going to create primarily the structure. So if your shadows are too dark, too hard cutting, you're going to notice them too much. Imperfections on a white face are identified by shadows. A wrinkle is a shadow, a bump is a shadow. So the light quality we wanted here, we wanted to have a very soft edge transfer and a fairly light shadow relative to the diffuse, meaning the contrast shouldn't be too strong. A large source, in this case a P42 with a strobe firing through it, created that large bank, very soft illumination quality. And the actual room created its own reflector fill. The whole room bounced light around. Separation light in the back with an amber gel bouncing off, illuminating the room with a warmer feeling, again, kind of a tonality of that day, like a late afternoon look, giving a little bit of color tones within her hair, not too much, just a nice kind of a warming separation. And then following the strobe on the outside, firing off plants inside this large cyclorama of panels we put together to create that high key look, and then the plants were inside that, creating there more of the pastel feeling of that sun coming through. It's a very simple setup and very lightweight material, meaning that those panels did fall over, they're not going to break a lamp or break a table like a lot of the old equipment made out of steel that we used to use so much.
Before taking exposure readings, Collins uses a Calumet exposure calculator to determine the bellows extension factor. A loss of 1/3 of a stop is determined. Incident meter readings are then taken to determine the relative exposure values of the main light and separation light. Collins finds equal exposure values, or a ratio of 1:1. To ensure a pure white background, a 5-degree spot attachment on the Minolta 4 meter is used for a reflective reading off of the outdoor cyclorama. Dean Collins explains.
The trees, small plants, as I created the texture of the outdoors, you couldn't really make them out. They're slightly out of focus, and they just had a very light, well, pastel. They're darker than the background. But to guarantee that the actual background went white, putting the panels out there and striking it with light was brought it up. To guarantee, though, a perfect white was nothing more than realizing that when the incident meter reading was taken in front of the subject, that gave us a reading of f16, which is the same as a reflective reading off of a gray card. So it tells us that gray will be gray at f16 within the subject's area. Taking a reflective reading off those panels outside, as reviewing them, the reflective reading said f64 the first time out. Well, f64, if you set your camera to f64, that means that background will be 18% gray. But if you set your camera for f16 for the subject's area to properly expose the subject, that background will be 16 times brighter, because your aperture is 16 times wider. at f16 than it is at f64. Well, who needs something 16 times brighter than 18% gray? That's much, much more bright than we need. 8 times brighter than 18% is white without detail. So by cutting the power on the strobes down there to where it read f45, I guaranteed that the background was going to be pure white with a little bit of detail. She was going to lose the fine detail of the hair strands hanging down. They weren't going to be eaten up because of so much we'll call blow-by, all that brightness that would be coming back. That's just not necessary. 8 times brighter than 18% is white without detail.
Ready for the first Polaroid check print, Collins has Claire take her place in a comfortable pose and then makes the first exposure.
Good. Okay, I'm going to raise the camera angle just so I can shoot a little bit down and knock off the dark area. That's just the top of the panels are missing, so that'll take care of that area. So we got the high key, bringing shrubbery on both sides and the outside, just to see the way the tonality is right here. Guess what I want? Just draping in right in there, and then we'll drop an amber gel, a little bit of separation amber gel. It's going to warm it, just to separate, just in the hair, and also warm the whole back. It's just too much monochromatic. I mean, everything is just so light. It's just a little too much for me. Back it up. Back it up. Move it in.
Directing from camera point of view, Collins has the outdoor plants
Right there,
pulled further
excellent. Do the
into
same
the
thing on the other
background of
side.
the shot. And then Kevin adds a Roscoe Lux amber gel to the indoor strobe for added warmth to the separation light. Collins reloads the 4x5 and makes the second test shot. To fully understand the effects of each element in Collins' lighting setup, we must see the evolution of the photograph. Our first image reveals the effect of a direct strobe used as the only source of illumination. Note the high specularity caused by the small source of light and the hard edge transfer between the diffused highlight and shadow. The addition of the P42 diffusion panel reduces the contrast between the specular highlight and the diffused highlight on the subject, while also producing a gradated transfer edge between the diffused highlight and shadow. With the separation strobe in place, the key of the interior background is brought up, and the separation is provided for the subject. Also note, the separation strobe creates some reflector fill, reducing the contrast between the diffused highlight and shadow. By adding an amber gel to the separation strobe, both the interior walls and the subject separation light take on the warm tones of a late afternoon. Finally, the outdoor background strobe, set to overexpose the white reflective background by an 8:1 ratio, adds a convincing look of daytime to this classic home portrait. Collins talks about using 4x5 for portraiture.
Usually photographing a person, we wouldn't use a view camera. It's a little slow and cumbersome, but the Cinar offers that capability of dropping that film in there and shutting the shutter down, cocking it for you, and then as you shut your cable down to fire it off, it shuts the aperture for you. So it's a real fast type of view camera to work with people. It's one of the best. And view cameras are wonderful for people, as they always were in the past, because of the ability to retouch. I mean, the less you have to amplify your piece of film to make the print, 30-40, 40-60 mural, which is what this shot was really designed for, is a large mural shot. The less you have to expand it, the less you're going to see any retouching that you may have to do to pick up any minor details, any minor crow's feet. Retouching right now in America is a big saleable item. Photographers are charging a lot of money for retouching because it's, look at what they're charging for cosmetic surgery, to remove wrinkles from eyes and tummy tucks and rebuilding the body. So photographers are starting to realize, well, if they charge so much for surgery, well, then why don't we charge for it in photography?
Using Kodak 6122 and VPS-3 4x5 sheet film, Dean Collins begins working with Claire to put a series of final images on film.
Okay, a little bit of a smile up top. Yeah, soft smile, okay. Bring your face just a little bit more, that way, eyes back in the camera, drop the head a little bit down, yeah, soft, eyes a little bit wider, there you go. Excellent. All right, bounce some photons. Very good, okay, right there, super. Okay, isn't that cute? Okay, great, good touch of a smile. Come on, big smile, bring the face just a little bit off right there, okay? Great. Okay, watch this, watch this, watch this. There you go. Okay, now bring it slowly this way. Now watch this a little bit back, and turn a little bit more that way, a little bit more.
Collins explains his lens selection for the portrait.
Good. The lens we used in this situation was a 210, slightly telephoto. Often people, when they go into home and environments, they'll use a wide angle lens to pick up the entire environment of that tone. I didn't really want that in this situation. This was more of a classical head and shoulder, 3/4 length photograph of a single person, so we used a slightly telephoto lens. If I was going to do the entire family on the sofa, whatever, we'd have used a wide angle lens, picked up the entire environment of the home and the keys. Lit would probably be the same, but choice of optic often will come down to how big of an area you have to photograph and how many people are going to be in the photograph. That's good right there. Okay. Excellent. Very good.
As Collins continues shooting, he checks his focus with a loop on the 4x5 ground glass to ensure no movement has occurred while changing film holders. Detailed log sheet is kept with notes on exposure and development for each transparency film holder.
Right there. There's a little, watch the head.
Note that the assistant is positioned to rapidly change film holders as Dean Collins makes the final exposures.
Face across, right there. Bring it back into me just a little bit. Excellent. Right there, okay, right there. And that camera right there, soft.
Looking at the final image, we can note the qualities that make the portrait a success. The large bank of illumination that Collins used as his main light source produced a natural-looking, soft-edge transfer that minimized any roughness in Claire's light skin, while the warm separation light in her hair, along with the textures of the background trees and the overexposed background, create a convincing outdoor effect that completes the high-key portrayal of Claire. Dean Collins adds some closing comments.
Any more women, especially in her age bracket, between the 20s and the 40s, are a working class. They're out making a living along with a husband. So to do a classical portrait, sometimes you don't have the ability to go in during the daytime. Woman's not there, she's working. So to photograph at night is often the situation. We wanted a daytime shot, though, to create that light key. Taking a strobe outside and realizing that what is daytime visually, photographically, is nothing more than the way the eye works, the way the brightness of the background will affect the eye as the eye exposes for the indoors. So it's a fairly easy situation here, and you can work around people's schedule and create any types of moods, any times of day, as if you know your lighting.
Three completely different moods have been captured in this high-key portrait series of a mother and her natural child. Effectively lighting a black skin tone and a white skin tone dispels several myths about exposures, especially when the subjects, background, and vignette are all lit with the same single source of illumination.
You may be wondering why I'm sitting here with such unattractive light on my face. We're trying to distinguish the difference between good exposure and good lighting. Good lighting is subjective, meaning the brightness of the specular and the shadow relative to the diffused. Good exposure is just the diffused looking to what it is, meaning the diffused being the true tone of my flesh and the true tone of my flesh coming through. If I had black skin, I'd appear black. If I had white skin, I should appear white. So good exposure means that I have the true tone of my flesh within the highlight area. The shadow and the specular are subjective. If we can understand that, we'll be able to work with a concept called key shifting, meaning that if you wish to raise the tone, in this case the background, to be brighter than it is right now, you can do it with still one light. Instead of adding light to the background, you have to realize that the background is dark because I am very bright. If I wish to make the background brighter, I have two options. I can add light to the background, and that would take another light. Some of us don't always have two lights. Maybe we only have one, and we wish to get more usage of that. By simply taking and bringing in a scrim between myself and the main light source, it lowers my value. I become darker. The background stays the same. It still has the same amount of light striking it. But now if we key shift, meaning that bringing my true exposure back, opening up the aperture on your camera or increasing the power on the main light to where I am now properly exposed. So I am now again, the tone of my diffuse highlight is at the proper point on the film. What happens is the background becomes brighter. The reason this is called key shifting is that the background really didn't get brighter. I just got darker. But by shifting my tone, my true diffused highlight back to the proper point of the film, what has stayed constant in the background now becomes brighter. This is why we call it key shifting. You're actually shifting a certain area on the piece of film and then bringing it back through your aperture. Now we have lowered specularity because we have a much larger source of illumination. We have brought up the background because you have dropped my value, opened up the aperture to bring my value back up. The last thing to do subjectively is to bring in the shadow density. That can be done by, since the light is going past the front of the panel as it is behind the panel, it is going to go over and strike a reflector, and by bringing a white reflector panel in, you can now kick light into the shadow area. Subjectively, if you want the shadow to be darker, you can then back the reflector further away to have more contrast. That is an opinion, that is up to you. So, we have now evenly illuminated the subject, controlled the shadow density, controlled the specular density, and then subjectively controlled the background relative to my value. The last thing we might want to do in this photograph is to tape a piece of acetate onto the front of our lens, a thing called a vignette. Now, this piece of acetate does stop light from going through it. It is somewhat dense itself, but by simply taking it on the lens and then adding a little bit of light onto it, still from the main light source, you're going to suddenly have this vignette that no longer is a contrast to the background, it's part of the background, you might say. It's all one comfortable key. So now we've been able to control the specular, control the shadow, bring up the background to the brightness that we want, and create a vignette quality all with one light.
Collins begins by setting up a single Lightform P22 panel with 2 layers of white reflective fabric. The roll of white seamless background paper will act as the background for this portrait series.
You're going to come in and get some close-up type ones on that. So you're not going to be using this.
Lightform support legs are connected to the frame of the diffusion panel to enable the panel to stand on its own. Collins then places the panel in the appropriate area for the shoot and moves on to set up the reflector panel. A second P22 panel is used for the frame of the reflector. An EC1 clamp is connected to the light stand and then snapped onto the panel, giving it stability and also making it easily adjustable. A single white reflective fabric is added to complete the reflector. Dean then adds black fabric to the lower half of the diffusion panel, securing it with 2 double clips. This will prevent light from bouncing off the floor and creating a low directional light source. A bronze-color strobe head is placed on a light stand, and the parabolic reflector is removed to create 180 degrees of directional light. Power cables are then connected to a Pulso 4 power pack, and Collins sets the strobe at half power. With his basic lighting complete, Collins assembles a Hasselblad 500 ELX on the Phobos stand. A 250mm f5.6 lens and a Pro lens shade are added, along with a 20-foot remote cable release to complete the setup. For the purpose of illustrating the evolution of this session, the lighting setup has been removed as Collins brings Debin and her mother Denise onto the set. It's important to note the brightly lit studio and Dean's relaxed mood at this time, which sets the attitude of the shoot and helps to remove any fears the child might have in this new and very different environment.
Okay, I'll just stay right there. What do you got all over you?
Collins brings in the bare bulb strobe and takes an incident reading with the dome of the meter facing the light source. This reading will establish an 18% value in the subject's area. Dean talks about using one light to do the job.
To get efficiency out of one light, in this case to make a background go pure white, one single light source high key, we have to realize that a reflective meter is a very important component here. By taking a reflective reading off of any tone, whether it be a black wall or a white wall, we get a reading that will tell us what to set our camera at to make it 18%. That's all those reflective meters know. Now if we take that reading, let's say in this case the reflective reading off of a white piece of paper was f16. If we shoot at f16, the background's 18%. Great, that's what the photograph would look like. But by taking our aperture and open it up 3 stops, or make the aperture 8 times bigger than f16, which is open it up to f5.6, that background becomes white without detail. It was called an 8-to-1, 8 times brighter than 18%. Now, we know then that if we are going to make a piece of white paper pure white, that with one light strike in it, if the reflective reading read f16, we wish to open our aperture up to f5.6. What opens our aperture up to f5.6? The exposure of the subject area. So to make the background go pure white, we get a reflective reading of f16, walk up, get an incident reading of the subject area. We want that area to read f5.6 so we can set our camera to f5.6. We do that by dropping a scrim in between the strobe and the subject, which lowers the subject value to f5.6. Now, if it doesn't lower to f5.6, if it lowers it to f8, we wish to put more and more layers of diffusion material on that scrim. In this case, it would be nothing more than ND material at this point. It's not diffusing it anymore, it's just darkening and darkening. Then, as it finally gets down to f5.6, we can expose it at f5.6. We have a proper exposure of the subject area, and the background, reading a reflective f16, goes white without detail, or in this case, it's called 8-to-1.
With the light of the bare strobe striking both the subjects and the background, Collins poses the mother and the daughter and takes his first test shot.
Can you hear that? Yeah.
Our first check print, although properly exposed, reveals high specularity on both subjects, with a hard shadow edge transfer caused by the bare bulb light source. Note the dull gray background. To soften the light qualities on the subjects, Collins brings in the diffusion panel, placing it to ensure complete coverage on Denise and Devin. Dean also makes sure that plenty of light spills past the back of the panel onto the background.
Just like that. Okay. I'll tell you what,
A second incident reading is taken to measure the intensity of the diffused light to again establish an 18% value in the subject's area. The 2 layers of reflective fabric have considerably lowered the value of the subject's area, but the value of light striking the background has remained constant. Our camera point of view reveals the subjects as the aperture is opened up to f5.6 for the proper subject value, with the background brightness increasing at the same rate. Collins then takes a reflective reading with the Minolta 4 meter and a 5-degree spot attachment to check for light fall off across the background. The varied readings tell Collins that he must readjust the white seamless to ensure even illumination throughout his background.
Working with one light on that background, trying to light the subject and the background, sometimes you'll see fall off on the background. Viewing through the lens, if you had a, say not a 250, more like a 150 millimeter lens, you're going to pick up an entire wide spread of the background. You'll see a fall off because that light source, that strobe, is closer to one side of that paper than it is the other. So the light falls off for the square of the distance, the inverse law. So it's important to pick up a proper angle of that reflective paper, to pick up one side and move it around to where the piece of paper behind the subject is even relative to the light source, to where the strobe evenly illuminates the entire area. Now your camera's never going to pick that up because your camera's taking a 2-dimensional photograph. I mean, so you're not going to pick up that 3-dimensionally, and it's going to evenly illuminate it. And you can check that by taking a reflective meter and taking readings all the way across the background that your camera is viewing, and seeing if it is all within the same proper exposure. Real good. Okay. Listen, I'll tell you what.
Ready for his second test shot, Collins works with Denise and Devin to find an effective pose and makes the exposure. In comparison to our first test shot, the use of the diffusion panel in our second shot has softened the edge transfer between the diffused highlight and the shadow, while also lowering the brightness of the specular highlights on both subjects. Also note that the change in aperture has now created a background of white without detail. Collins brings in a P22 panel with a single layer of white reflective fabric to act as a reflective fill. Raw light spilling past the front of the main diffusion panel strikes the white reflector to produce a non-directional, low specular fill in the shadow areas. Contrast of the diffused highlight to the shadow can be judged by eye. Collins then proceeds to capture the mood of the sitting and create our next test shot. With the addition of the reflector fill in check print number 3, we can see that the intensity of the shadow areas has been raised from the soft, non-directional light of the reflector fill. Remember, only one light source is being used to control our main light, reflector fill, and the background.
Using a white reflector to fill in the shadow in this case was important because not only did the raw light go past the panel onto the background, but it also went past the front of the panel and hit the reflector. If we would have had a silver reflector, which has always been thought of as the reflector you use to fill in the shadow, a silver mylar, that's a very small source when it's raw hitting that. If it is a mylar, it'd be very, very directional light, very hard casting shadows going across the face, almost canceling out the quality of the soft light from the large scrim, and a lot of specularity. So since we did have this powerful amount of light going past hitting, this white reflector's kicking in, we could get away with a white material. And when that small source struck this white material, it diffused it out, gave a very soft quality, and then we had the control to actually keep current or keep constant with the quality of light we were working for in this particular theme.
A reflective reading through an acetate vignette must be 8 times or 3 f-stops brighter than the subject area to ensure an 8:1 ratio or a pure white vignette. Scotch tape secures the vignette to the lens shade.
Great. Yeah. Oh.
With the raw light of the strobe now striking the background, the reflector fill, and the vignette, Collins shoots his final images on Ektachrome EPN 100.
Okay.
The high-key portraits have a soft, pure white base with the vignette made from Roscolux Tough Frost.
Can you sit up real tall now? Just sit up real tall almost, yeah. Yeah, there you go. All right. When using one light to try to do a high key, lens selection is very, very important. Working with, let's say, a normal lens, to do a 3/4 photograph, you'd have a very large view of that background. The longer your millimeters is, the more you're going to back up to keep a 3/4 length photograph. If you put a 250 millimeter lens up on your camera, you're going to back way up. Now that's going to narrow your view area. You can work with a very small, narrow background behind the subject with a long lens and still be able to do a 3/4 photograph. Now, the efficiency of this is that your fall off in the background is not going to be anywhere. If it is a great deal, you're never going to notice it because you're only viewing a very small area of the background, and if there is a slight fall off, you won't pick it up. If you're viewing a 9-foot background completely, there's probably going to be a good half-stop fall off from one side to the other, and you're going to pick up that gradation in that photograph. So longer lenses are going to help you an awful lot of getting a very even illuminated background.
The ability to control the key of your photograph with your aperture is a concept that can open many avenues in portraiture. With the confidence of properly exposing your subjects, you will gain the freedom to be creative and concentrate on capturing the true emotions of a portrayal.
What you saw today was possibly a little different than what normally happened in the studio. For educational purposes, you might say, we let the cameras come in and film the way we would set up and light a child. A lot of this would be done long before the child would ever enter the room, so it'd be very quick, accurate. The child would sit down and we'd be done with the photograph before they even knew it. But the most important thing to catch out of it is the interaction between the adult and a child. Not to get on their level, but to make sure that they enjoy it, that you're part of them, that you're your friend. A lot of the stuff is very almost doctorish. It's like what happens when you go into a doctor's office, all these lights aimed at you and this steel and this chrome, and it can be very scary because a lot of children don't have a lot of good experience going to doctors and being poked with needles. So when they first walk in here, it can be very, very scary. It's important that you realize that. You realize how nervous they can be and to stay with them, to keep with them. And the moment they walk in here, not to have it very, very dark and a very bright area in one spot. Make sure the whole place is well lit up to where they feel very comfortable, and don't even let them know what's going on. Sit them down and play with them, and then if it is going to be a series of interactions between the mother and child, or very serious or very happy, work it out as well as you can and realize probably the least expensive thing you have right now is the film. I mean, and you burn a few images here and there and make sure, pick out what you want, and that magic shot's going to come up if everything's on film properly and you let it happen on its own. Big smooches, big smooches. Oh, big smooches. Big smoochies. Oh my goodness, all these loves. All these loves. Don't pick your nose. No. Well, you pick your nose, I want to take a picture of it. Oh.
In this series of colorful portraits, Collins uses butterfly lighting to achieve the same light quality for 3/4 length and head and shoulder portraits. The single source main light provides complete control of the shadow densities, while a simple projection box adds a rainbow of colors to the background. Dean Collins begins the setup with a roll of slate gray Savage background paper, as his assistant, Kevin Scott Schumacher, begins to load the camera backs for the shoot. Two Lightform EC1 clamps attached to light stands are clipped to a P22 panel with 2 layers of translucent fabric forming the main diffusion panel. A bronze-color strobe head is then placed on a boom stand and positioned over the edge of the panel. Power cables are attached to the Pulso 4 power pack, and Kevin sets the appropriate power, as Dean adjusts the size of the light source on the overhead panel.
Center on pass, because you only illuminate about 50% of that.
A diagram reveals that the size of the light source is determined by the distance of the strobe head to the panel. With the initial setup complete, Collins brings Nicolene onto the set and positions her directly under the main light source. An incident meter reading is taken
like
in the
that,
subject
yeah,
area,
right there, okay,
and
right
Collins
there.
makes the first test shot.
You got it right there.
The effects of a small light source without the diffusion panel would produce high specularity and a hard edge transfer between the diffused highlight and the shadow. By adding the main diffusion panel, specularity is lowered on Nicolene, and there is now a soft edge transfer between the diffused highlight and the shadow. A second P22 panel with white reflective fabric is attached to the stands to provide non-directional fill. Raw light spills past the front of the overhead diffusion panel, striking the white reflector to bounce soft, low specular fill light onto the subject. Collins adjusts the amount of spill light that strikes the reflector to provide the proper amount of fill for Nicolene. An incident meter reading is taken to recheck for proper exposure, and Collins makes his second test print. As the strobe fires through the overhead panel, diffused light strikes the subject and provides low specular qualities, while the light spilling past the edge of the panel does not affect the subject. With the addition of the white reflector panel, the raw light spilling past the overhead panel is bounced back into the subject, providing an even, non-directional fill that illuminates the subject for both 3/4 length and close-up portraiture. Dean Collins talks about butterfly lighting.
Umbrellas are very good for many jobs in the field, on location, to where you don't have a lot of time to set up, you don't have the ability to work in large areas. But when you have a controlled situation, such as we did in the studio today, we have the ability to work with what we'll call scrims, an item which has the ability and gives you the flexibility of sending light through it, and by doing that, increasing the size of it, creating a much softer quality, and raw light past it to hit reflector fills to fill in. And that's exactly what we did today. Above me is a large light source being caused by a small origin of source, you might say a small strobe, about 6 inches in diameter reflector, fired through a diffusion material, 2 layers of ripstop nylon. Now that's causing the soft quality casting down on my face and on the model's face today, creating this very soft pattern below my nose, lowering specularity, cutting the shine out of my skin, and not creating extremely intense catch lights in the eyes. Now, the light is going through, that is the main light on me. The fill light is coming from the same light, going past it, hitting this bottom reflector, which we've chosen white diffusion material instead of a silver or a mylar. If you use silver or mylar down here, that becomes very, very directional. The source is very small in its return because it is mirrored to that small source up there. Again, remember the light is going past, it's raw light, hitting this white reflector. The white there then diffuses the light evenly, and that becomes my fill. To control the amount of fill, I just basically control how much light I let go past that light source above, hitting that bottom reflector. If I want a low fill, I bring the light source a little bit more up, less light hitting that. If I want a stronger fill, I'll back it away and illuminate this very, very evenly and let a lot of light kick up. So I have the ability to control the pattern by just the placement of the light. The separation light, we'll call hair light, separating the subject from the background, is being done in the same way. I wanted a large source of illumination back there doing the separation for me. I didn't want a very directional light, like a direct strobe striking somebody from behind, because that'll wash out. It'll produce what's called high specularity, wash out, produce hot spot on the tip of the nose if it goes past and hits the face. And it blows out a lot of detail in the hair. Putting a flat back there, bouncing the light off the flat, producing a large bank, very, very soft quality light, wrapping around without a lot of loss of detail in it. So when you do have a chance, when you do have the time, sometimes scrims are a little bit more useful and definitely more control in light-controlled situations.
With the main light set, Collins drops in a black gobo to protect the lens from any spill light. Next, a P22 with white reflective fabric is raised on two light stands to act as a main separation panel.
That right there. Great. Why don't you bring Pup about right in here, angle right there, just to kick it back on her.
Kevin uses magnetic spots to hold a Roscoe Lux amber gel onto the barn doors of a Broncolor strobe. By placing the strobe on a stand and aiming it directly up at the separation panel, the light will bounce off of the panel and create a larger separation light, providing more detail to the warm separation for Nicolene's hair. A look at the last test print shows good quality light on Nicolene from the overhead main light and reflector fill, but a lack of separation from the dark background. By aiming a strobe at the reflective separation panel, a warm separation with low specular qualities provides good detail in Nicolene's hair and clean separation from the background. A diagram shows the relative placement of the separation panel and strobe to the set.
There's a lot of confusion on how meters work. There's incident and reflective meters. Incident sets what we'll call areas, reflective sets mass or tones. The incident sets what we'll call 18% relative to the subject's true tone. In the case of this photograph of Nicolene, there is a white-skinned individual here. The incident reading set 18%, which guaranteed that her tone was properly placed on film. The shadows and the specularity, the moisture within her skin, were controlled by us, by these reflector panels and by these large diffuse banks. If we wanted higher specularity, we would then choose a different quality of light, more directional. If we wanted a darker shadow, we would have removed these reflectors, moved them further away from the subject so the shadows would get darker. But all of these brightnesses, shadow, specular, are all relative to what we call the diffuse highlight, her true tone, her true flesh. The incident meter sets that on the film by setting what we call mid-tone or 18%. Now a reflective meter does something different. It reads mass, it reads white objects, black objects, and tries to make them all 18%. Now you don't have to do what it says, it just tells you what to do to make them 18%. What you set your camera at relative to what your meter says will tell you exactly before you ever look at a Polaroid what the tone of the object will be. If the object reads f5.6, reflective, if you set your camera at f5.6, it'll be 18%. But if you set your camera at f8, it'll be 1/2 of 18% because f8 is 1/2 the opening of f5.6. Fine, give me an incident reading.
Collins has Kevin take an incident meter reading to establish an aperture for the subject brightness.
Hey, play.
82/3 at 80.
Okay. Okay.
A second incident reading is taken to determine the brightness of the separation light relative to the subject brightness.
Okay.
After establishing the subject's exposure value, Kevin switches the incident dome to a 5-degree spot attachment on the Minolta meter. A reflective reading is then taken off the gray background paper to guarantee the 3-stop difference that Collins needs to work with a black background.
In this particular situation, we're utilizing a thing called area control, meaning that we wish to control the background brightness. We really can't control the brightness of the subject because that's a constant. The subject has white skin, they should appear white. But by changing the amount of light striking the subject, we have the ability to control the background brightness. You have to understand that the background brightness in a photograph is really relative to how much light is striking the background, how much light is reflecting off relative to the type of paper it's hitting. Is it a white piece of paper, a gray piece of paper, or a black piece of paper? And then what aperture your camera is set at. I mean, you can take your aperture of your camera and put light on a background, and by changing your aperture on your camera, make the background any brightness you want. Question is, what controls the aperture opening? What controls the aperture opening is the subject's brightness. How much illumination is in the subject's area. So area control is identifying the brightness of the subject's area relative to how much light is coming off the background. If the background isn't bright enough, I have two options. I can either add light to the background to make it brighter, or if I don't have any more light to add to the background, I've used all my power on my background strobe, I can always cut my illumination on the subject's area, cut my main light, lower the illumination of the subject area, and then open up my aperture, and the background will become brighter. Same thing if I wish to make the background darker, and I can't cut my power on the background anymore, I can either A, choose a different background paper, such as a darker gray or a black piece of paper, which will make it darker. Or if I don't have any more background paper, I only have a gray background paper, let's say, then I can increase the brightness on my subject, shut my aperture down, and that'll make my background go darker. So the concept of area control in this situation is identifying that the background brightness, in this case, is really controlled by A, its brightness, and B, what the aperture is open at. And the aperture's opening is controlled by the subject's brightness. So you have the ability to add and subtract light to control brightnesses of the background.
Assured of a black background from the reflective reading, Dean can now add color to the background and be sure of a true saturated color return. With a background strobe in place, a simple, inexpensive color projection box is attached to the strobe with a bungee cord strap. Kevin sets the appropriate power on a Pulso 4 power pack and checks the strobe for operation. Earlier in the day, Kevin constructed the projection box from a large sheet of foam board. By first sketching the square outline of the box onto the foam board, Kevin could then cut the box out and begin shaping the projection box to the strobe and reflector that he would be using. The interior is sprayed with gloss black paint, and Kevin begins making the necessary adjustments for a light, tight fit. Colored gels are then cut into thin strips, attached to one another with transparent tape, and finally mounted onto the finished box. Dean Collins adds some final comments on the use of a background projection box.
Building a projection box to generate the colors onto the background, three things must be followed very closely. First of all, paint the inside of this projection box black, not white, because you don't want the light to flood out evenly. You want it to be very directional coming out of the strobe. 2, put some Tough Frost by Roscoe over your strobe before you place it in there to where when the strobe fires out, it's very even coverage. It doesn't have a hot spot in the middle. And 3, when you put the gels over the front of the box, overlap the gels about 1 inch. Do not put it any less than 1 inch, because if you do not overlap them, you'll have a fall off of color, a kind of a neutral area on the backgrounds, which breaks up the quality of that rainbow pastel effect.
With the main light off to create a subject silhouette, Collins views through the camera and directs Kevin to adjust the background strobe until he finds a desired color pattern behind the subject. To prevent light contamination on the background, a P22 panel with black fabric is laid on the floor to absorb any spill light from the projection box. With the colored light pattern set on the background, Kevin takes a series of reflective readings off of the background paper to determine the brightness of each background color relative to the subject incident reading.
Okay, let me give you a little bit more.
How much are you going up?
Just 6/10. Okay. Yeah, still in blue. Great. F8, we're shooting 11. Okay, that's a 1 to 2. If we're shooting 11, that's a 1 to 2 blue. It's a pretty rich blue, pardon?
With the subject reading at F11,
Okay,
Collins
what is
determines
the
that the F8
center?
reflective reading from the blue on the background will produce a 1 to 2 blue, or a blue that will be 1/2 the value of 18% in the subject area.
1 to 2 blue. That'll be nice. Okay, fine. Right there, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
With the lighting setup complete, Collins uses a 150mm lens to begin producing a variety of head and shoulder and 3/4 length portraits.
Okay, turn the head up just a little bit.
Notice the addition of the brilliant colors on the background, and that by tilting the projection box, Collins has complete control of the placement of any color on the background.
No, that's good, that's good. Bring it up, bring it up, bring it up. Okay, eyes wide, a little wider. Just a little bit over here. Yeah, excellent, excellent, excellent. Yeah, love it, love it, love it, love it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ow, ow, yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. Oh, that's wonderful, 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 wonderful right here. Okay, a little bit of a smile. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah, good.
Collins
Okay,
talks
serious,
about his
serious,
lens
serious,
selection
serious.
for Nicolene.
Who cares? God's with us. We chose two optics within this shoot. We chose a 250 and we chose the 150, both for close-ups and 3/4. The 150, if taken a 3/4, will show the entire background area because of its spread, its angle of view. If you then do a head and shoulder as you come in closer, it narrows its angle of view, but relative to the 250, it's much wider. If we just want to get a few of the color tones behind the subject, we would use the longer lens. We would have to back up to do the head and shoulder. It'd have a much narrower scope. You'd see just a few of the color bands. But if we want to have a head and shoulder and want to show all the color bands in there, you show the entire background, we'd then replace it with the 150, come in closer, which would then have a wider spread and see the entire background. So the amount of color we got in the shot of the background, on especially the head and shoulders, were very relative to do we use a 250 or a 150 millimeter lens. Okay, here we go, just like that. Whoa. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Switching to the 250 millimeter lens, Dean begins shooting the final series of portraits.
Right there, bring your face, yeah, 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 yeah. Elbows just a little bit out, elbows just a little bit out, 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 out. Okay. Super. Super, super duper duper. Good, good, good. Lean right towards me, lean towards me, lean in, lean in, lean in, lean in. Come on, there you go, there you go. More, 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 more. Now watch this roll ahead, just a little bit over now. Over, over, over. Yeah, 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 right there. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, chin, yeah, good. Don't flex the muscle too much. Okay, right there. Maybe, you know what the girls say. Yeah, okay, bring your face just a little bit. A little bit, gets pissed off when you do that.
Dean Collins adds some final comments.
The most important part about this whole shooting session really has nothing to do with the lighting or the backgrounds or the vibrance or the perfect exposure. It has to do with that expression, that excitement that coming across to the camera. And that isn't done by paying a model a lot of money. It's done by the photographer getting it out of them. And that's done by excitement, letting that model know, as insecure or as secure as she or he is, that they're doing everything right. And then they're going to work harder for you. So that excitement, that exhilaration, that expression that you're going for is going to be done by you getting excited. Don't stand back there and try to act cool, because that's not going to help anybody. If you really get in there, if you really excite them, if you really fire them up, and by letting them know that's gorgeous, it's wonderful, this is super, this is great, say things like that. Let them know as you're looking through that camera, get excited to where they're behind you. You know, they get totally behind you, and the thing's going to come out, and that's the most important thing. And that's a touch that no technician, no technical piece of science is going to help you. It's just going to be you getting excited and making that person feel that they're beautiful, they're good looking, or the whole image is just exciting because they're doing it right.
Rolling tape.
That's good. Here you go. Freeze it, freeze it, freeze it, freeze. Okay, now don't move again because we're going to try it with the Polaroid out.
Okay, subject of lighting, take 2.
Did I get that duck? Ah, damn it.
We're rolling tape. Thank you.
I can't believe it. Look at this. Look, get over here. Come here.
Right here.
Is that thing rolling?
Yeah.
Well, do you want him to start in with it? Or do you want him to already be there? Okay. Kevin, bring in the P22 panel, which is available at any of your local camera stores. By light form, not expensive.
Oh, Tony, area 619
And send your credit cards.
Oh.
Olivia, come here. Come get over here. The point is the concept of good lighting to good exposure. Right now, I'm properly lit. And it's gorgeous, isn't it? Good light. This is fine light. Hey, no problem.
Okay, this is take one of the objective of the